Hey guys, tonight we drift back to 13th century Kyoto, a world of paper walls, slow-burning incense, and the faint clatter of sandals on polished floors. You're about to become Emperor Go-Saga, a man destined to rule quietly while everyone around him makes noise. The air smells like rain and sandalwood. The lanterns flicker, and somewhere in the palace gardens, a frog croaks as if announcing your reign. You probably won't survive this, at least not without a few existential crises about how little power you actually have. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes beneath a canopy of embroidered silk. It's 12:42, and Kyoto's spring mist curls through the veranda slats like it's shy about entering imperial space. You are the freshly appointed emperor, Go-Saga, successor to Go-Horikawa, though appointed is a generous term. The courtiers bow deeply, their faces lowered, but you can feel it already. Their reverence belongs not to you, but to the ghost of power that hovers somewhere above your throne. The imperial seal presses cool against your fingers. It's heavy for something that will accomplish so little. Outside, a caged nightingale chirps. You think of freedom, and then quickly of duty. Being emperor, it turns out, means thinking mostly of things you can't have. Your father's reign ended with the shogunate in Kamakura quietly pulling the strings. The Hojo regents, those polite puppeteers, control appointments, taxes, even temple repairs. Historians still argue whether Go-Saga ever truly tried to wrest back power or simply accepted the role of ceremonial mascot. You, in this moment, don't yet know which kind of emperor you'll be, but you do know one thing. Your robes are unbearably itchy, and no one warns you that imperial silk feels like sitting in a polite oven. The courtiers murmur poetry about your radiant ascendancy. A senior monk sprinkles holy water, and someone nearby faints from the heat. You suppress a smile. It wouldn't do to laugh at your own enthronement. Later that night, you walk alone through the gardens. Fireflies float over the pond like tiny lanterns. The moon's reflection shivers on the water, perfect until the koi break it. You think of the great emperors of the past, Kamu, Daigo, Go-Toba, and wonder if they ever felt this hollow inside their gilded cages. The court poets will later call your reign serene. That's one word for it. Another might be carefully ignored. You pass a cherry tree, ancient, lopsided, refusing to bloom evenly, and you realize you sympathize with it. Power here grows sideways, never straight. Somewhere in the distance, temple bells toll. You count them out of habit, losing track at 5. The sound fades into the murmur of servants extinguishing lamps. Kyoto breathes, patient and old. A small page boy, maybe 9, scurries up to hand you a message. You already know who it's from. The cloistered emperor, retired but never quite gone. The note is polite, full of those passive-aggressive flourishes that pass for guidance. In all things, remember humility before destiny. Translation: don't make waves. You tuck it into your sleeve and watch the boy retreat, wondering how many emperors before you practiced obedience in the name of harmony. The next morning, ceremony begins at dawn. You sit still as officials read edicts in voices that drone like distant bees. Your official portrait is painted, lacquered black hair, serene gaze, posture so perfect it hurts. None of your historians will note the slight twitch in your right knee from holding still too long. During breakfast, a dish of salted plum is placed before you. You're told it symbolizes perseverance. You bite in, and your face involuntarily puckers. The attendant looks horrified, but you laugh quietly. Perseverance, apparently, tastes awful. For a fleeting moment, the morning light hits your cup of tea, and you imagine a different kind of rain, one where words carry weight, where an imperial decree means something more than ceremonial ink. But the fantasy dissolves as soon as the court chamberlain bows and informs you that the Hojo regents have already approved all decisions for the week. You nod graciously, pretending it's fine. It's a skill you'll perfect over the years, appearing tranquil while internally composing sarcastic haikus. Still, not everything is hollow ceremony. You find small pleasures, the scent of fresh ink on paper, the rhythm of court music, and the absurdly dramatic gossip about whose sleeves brushed whose at the poetry banquet. There's a kind of power in peace, you tell yourself. Maybe this is what stewardship means, not conquest, but quiet endurance. A fringe tidbit the scholars like to mention. One of your childhood tutors, a monk named Soshin, swore that emperors could influence the weather by composing sincere poems. He once had you write a tanka to summon snow, and when flakes fell that night, you felt invincible. You later learned it was just a cold front. Still, you keep writing, just in case. As spring deepens, you take to strolling incognito through Kyoto's narrow lanes, disguised in the robes of a lesser noble. You pass shops selling inkstones, children flying kites made of old prayer slips, and women gossiping about the latest scandal at court, something about a misplaced love letter and a misused chrysanthemum seal. You realize the city doesn't need an emperor to keep breathing. It's alive on its own. In the evenings, you return to the palace where the corridors echo with the rustle of attendants' robes. You sometimes pause by a certain window overlooking the western hills. The sunset paints the sky in layers of orange and violet, the same colors found in your ceremonial banners. You wonder if that's a coincidence or some ancient designer's idea of cosmic branding. And through it all, you keep learning the art of restraint. When a courtier flatters you too obviously, you smile as if you believe it. When the shogunate sends polite demands disguised as suggestions, you sign the documents with your imperial seal and imagine drawing a tiny mustache on their crest. But beneath your calm exterior, something quietly sharpens, a resolve not to vanish entirely into ceremonial oblivion. If you can't command armies, perhaps you can shape culture. If not war, then poetry. If not edicts, then symbols. You start attending more scholarly gatherings, encouraging record-keeping, supporting temple restoration projects. These are small acts, but they ripple quietly through history. One evening, as the cicadas hum, you overhear a conversation between two courtiers. One says, "Our emperor is gentle as still water." The other replies, "Still water hides the deepest pools." You turn away, hiding a smile. Kyoto that summer grows humid and fragrant with lotus blossoms. The nights are long, filled with the music of insects and the low, mournful twang of the biwa lute drifting from distant quarters. You listen, eyes half closed, thinking that maybe serenity isn't the absence of power, it's the choice to stay calm while everything else trembles. And though you don't yet know it, this quiet beginning, this reign of restraint and small defiance, will echo for centuries, shaping dynasties, poetry, and even the myth of imperial patience itself. For now, though, you simply breathe in the night air, steady and sweet, and let the weight of the chrysanthemum throne settle softly on your shoulders.
Morning again. The light spills through the bamboo screens, thin and golden, as if even the sun knows better than to barge too boldly into the emperor's quarters. You stretch beneath layers of embroidered silk, feeling the faint ache in your shoulders from sleeping too still. There's a gentle knocking, 3 taps, pause, then 2. That's your mother's rhythm. You don't need to ask why she's here. Mothers in the imperial court always have reasons. She glides in, her robes whispering like a sigh. Her perfume smells of plum blossoms and quiet judgment. Empress Dowager Fujiwara no Shikishi. Clever, serene, and capable of orchestrating 3 marriages, a poetry contest, and a coup rumor before breakfast. She sits beside you and fans herself, eyes half-lidded. "You slept?" she asks softly. You nod, knowing better than to elaborate. "Good," she says. "You will need your rest." The retired emperor sent another message. Of course he did. The man known as Go-Toba, technically your ancestor, spiritually your shadow, still rules from behind bamboo curtains. He's been retired for decades, yet his influence seeps through every corridor like smoke. This, you realize, is the real imperial dynamic, a chessboard where half the pieces pretend they've left the game. Historians still argue whether this system, the Insei government, was brilliant continuity or just hereditary micromanagement. You're leaning toward the latter. Your mother watches your expression carefully. "You must appear grateful," she advises. "He believes you owe him your throne." You smile blandly, the imperial default expression. "Of course, I owe everyone everything." The day unfolds in layers of formality. Servants lay out your robes, 3 inner silks, 1 outer, all coordinated to the season. A courtier named Norimune, who seems powered entirely by gossip and rice wine fumes, briefs you on the day's audiences. You'll meet the envoy from Kamakura, attend a poetry recital, and pretend to listen while a monk drones on about the moral decay of modern youth, who, to be fair, probably just read the tale of Genji too many times. You walk through the corridors, the floorboards creaking softly under the ancient weight of ceremony. Behind the bamboo screens, courtiers whisper. You don't catch the words, but you know the tone, admiration blended with speculation. Every movement of the emperor is currency. Even your pauses are political. At the morning audience, the Kamakura envoy bows so deeply you half wonder if he'll stay that way. His robes are plain but expensive, dyed with subtle confidence. He brings a message from the Hojo regent, full of politeness and control. The shogunate extends its blessings for His Majesty's continued reign, he intones. Translation: we're still in charge and we're letting you exist. You respond in perfect court diction, thanking him for his guidance in maintaining harmony between sword and scepter. It's a lovely phrase, one you practiced in the mirror, even though both of you know the sword outweighs the scepter by several tons of iron and ambition. Later, as the envoy departs, you overhear a maid whisper. He smiles like a cat who already ate the bird. You suppress a chuckle. She's not wrong. By afternoon, the palace hums with quieter business. Courtiers glide between chambers, fans fluttering like nervous butterflies. You find yourself in a secluded veranda overlooking a pond. Your half-brother, Prince Tsunehito, joins you, barely a teenager, curious and bright-eyed. He asks, "Brother, why do the monks call us divine if the shoguns command the armies?" You pause. Because words are easier than wars. He nods, absorbing it like a koan. The truth is, your household functions as much on illusion as it does on rice and ritual. The court women, your mother, your aunts, the empress herself, maintain invisible networks of correspondence, passing folded poems that double as political memos. The men preen over calligraphy and incense mixtures, but the real decisions happen behind screens, in whispers, and under the flutter of fans. A mainstream fact, even during your reign, the court still clung to Heian-era elegance, ranking perfumes, assigning flower themes to months, debating the superior shade of wisteria dye. Historians marvel at how such delicate traditions persisted amid the rise of samurai authority. You personally find it comforting. When power is gone, aesthetics are what's left. One evening, while the moon drifts pale above Kyoto, you join your mother and several attendants for a tea gathering. The tea is thick and bitter, whisked to a froth. She remarks on your posture, on the lingering influence of Go-Toba, and on the rumor that one of your cousins is secretly composing satirical poems about court life. Mockery, she says, is the privilege of the powerless. You grin. Then we must be very privileged indeed. She glares, but you catch the flicker of amusement in her eyes. That night, you can't sleep. The palace corridors seem longer in darkness, stretching endlessly like the responsibilities you never asked for. You wander to the inner courtyard, where the scent of night jasmine thickens the air. A lone court musician strums his biwa near the gate, playing softly for no one in particular. You sit, unannounced. He startles, then bows so low you fear he'll fold in half. Keep playing, you say quietly. The melody rises, gentle and circular. You close your eyes. The notes feel like ripples over a still pond, each vibration a fleeting hint of something truer than ceremony. You realize then that power isn't only command, it's attention. Whoever controls beauty controls memory. Maybe that's where your empire will live. A fringe tidbit scholars sometimes share. Legend claims you once decreed that no one could sneeze during a poetry contest, as it disrupted the spiritual flow of verse. The story's probably exaggerated, but you did once pause a recital because someone dropped a teacup too loudly. Silence, after all, was sacred currency at court. By dawn, you're back at your desk writing a letter to the shogunate filled with elegant nonsense. The wording is perfect. The meaning, non-existent. But each stroke of the brush feels like a quiet rebellion, a statement that the emperor still speaks, even if no one listens. The palace awakens with the smell of breakfast, steamed rice, miso, and grilled fish. You eat mechanically, your thoughts already wandering to the next ceremony, the next conversation through veiled implication. There's comfort in the routine, like the rhythm of a chant whose meaning has been forgotten, but whose melody still soothes. As you walk through the inner garden, a small heron lands on a rock near the pond. Its white feathers gleam against the moss. You stand there together, unmoving. The bird dips its head into the water and emerges with a glinting silver fish. Efficient, decisive. You watch it fly off and can't help muttering, "Show off." By late afternoon, the palace shimmers with late sunlight, turning everything gold and unreal. You attend a council meeting where the ministers discuss rice yields and tax adjustments, none of which you're expected to understand deeply. But you listen anyway, catching nuances others miss. The hesitation when they mention Kamakura approval, the unease when your name appears in financial contexts. You may not wield authority, but you're learning to read silence like a text. As dusk falls, you sit once more behind those bamboo screens, watching the world beyond blur into shadow. The wind rustles through the garden, carrying faint laughter from the servants' quarters. You envy their freedom to laugh without calculation. Still, you smile faintly. You've survived another day as emperor, performing power so gracefully that even power itself might believe you. Somewhere, a temple bell tolls, deep and resonant. You count 7 strikes, then lose count, just listening. The sound vibrates through your ribs. You think of your mother's warning, of Go-Toba's shadow, of the invisible lattice of influence pressing around you. You exhale slowly, the air tasting of green tea and faint rebellion. Behind bamboo screens, you're learning how to rule without ruling, how to exist where visibility is both gift and trap.
And in that stillness, half prayer, half defiance, you begin to sense it, the quiet rhythm of a rain that will echo longer than anyone expects. By the time the cicadas start screaming in the summer heat, you've learned to move like mist through the palace, present but barely tangible. Each corridor smells faintly of ink, incense, and nostalgia. You drift toward the audience hall, not because there's anything to decide, but because appearances still matter in this kingdom of paper and etiquette. The morning brings a poetry contest, which is less a competition and more an elaborate excuse for nobles to display their latest calligraphy styles and flirt through veiled metaphors. You sit on your dais, fanning yourself lazily, pretending not to notice the nervous tremor in each contestant's voice as they recite verses about love, moonlight, and the impermanence of existence. Everything, it seems, is impermanent, except these contests. One old poet, his back bent like a willow, steps forward and reads a tanka so beautiful the room holds its breath. When he finishes, you murmur, "Exquisite," because that's what emperors are supposed to murmur. But inside, you're thinking that the poem sounds suspiciously similar to one written during the Heian period. You almost want to call him out on plagiarism, but decorum dictates you simply nod and let the court whisper about homage instead. You watch as silk sleeves sway, fans snap open, and courtiers exchange glances over the rim of teacups. This, you realize, is your empire. Choreography. Every gesture is both performance and survival. After the contest, you retreat to the veranda. A faint breeze ripples through the bamboo groves beyond the garden walls, bringing relief from Kyoto's humid stillness. You can hear the soft splash of koi in the pond and the faint tinkling of a wind chime shaped like a lotus. You sip your tea, strong, bitter, grounding. Your attendant, a wiry man named Takamatsu, kneels beside you. "Your Majesty," he says, "there are rumors from Kamakura again. The regent plans new taxes." "Ah," I murmur, "the poetry of finance." He hides a smile. "Shall I send a letter expressing our concern?" "Send one expressing our utmost admiration for their efficiency. Then add a postscript about the importance of compassion. Make it sound like a compliment." He bows, already understanding the art of your subtle sarcasm. In the background, a troop of young courtiers giggle as they chase a paper fan across the garden. Their laughter rings through the still air like chimes. You remember when you were that young, before every word had to balance between grace and danger. Back then, you thought being emperor meant being free. Turns out, it's mostly about learning how to bow without breaking your spine. A mainstream historical fact drifts through your thoughts. During your reign, court culture clung stubbornly to Heian traditions, even as the samurai class grew dominant. Aristocrats still ranked perfumes, composed linked verse, that is, renga, and held moon-viewing parties as if the world beyond the capital hadn't changed. Historians still argue whether this persistence was cultural pride or oblivious denial. You suspect it was both, and maybe a survival instinct. Beauty, after all, was the last refuge of the powerless. Later that week, a monk visits the palace to present a newly copied sutra. The scroll gleams gold on black ink, meticulous and sacred. He bows, murmuring blessings, then begins a long discourse on impermanence. You listen politely, but your mind drifts. The ceiling beams are dark with age, each carved dragon frozen mid-flight. You imagine them coming to life, shaking dust from their scales and flying far away from this gilded stillness. The monk pauses. "Your Majesty, are you enlightened?" You blink. "Not yet," you say honestly. He smiles, as if expecting that. "Then you are closer than most." When he leaves, you feel strangely lighter.
Maybe enlightenment isn't about knowing truths, but surviving long enough to recognize absurdity. That evening, the palace hosts a gagaku performance. Slow, stately court music that sounds like time melting. The flutes are breathy, the drums soft as heartbeats. You sit through it all, face serene, mind wondering. You think about how strange it is that people call this era peaceful. Peace, it turns out, can be suffocating when it's mandatory. Still, you find comfort in details. The faint sweetness of sandalwood smoke, the gleam of moonlight on the lacquered floor, the soft rustle of a fan as someone hides a yawn. Life here is a series of textures. A fringe tidbit whispers through later chronicles. One court lady claimed you once outlawed loud laughter within palace walls after midnight because it disturbed the spirits. The truth is more mundane. You simply asked them to keep it down so I could sleep. The spirits, you assumed, could manage. Weeks blend into months, each marked by festivals. The Tanabata celebration brings ribbons of colored paper tied to bamboo stalks, each bearing handwritten wishes. You write one too, discreetly, and hang it near your window. It says, "May the emperor's silence be mistaken for wisdom." A servant later reports that a gust of wind carried your wish away. You grin. Perhaps that's answer enough. One humid night, you walk the corridors alone, carrying a paper lantern. Shadows sway along the walls like restless ancestors. You find your way to the archives, where ancient chronicles are stored, thousands of volumes, each telling a version of the same story, emperors rising, falling, and fading into legend. You run your fingers along the spines and wonder what they'll write about you. Probably something like, "He ruled peacefully and said very little." You almost laugh. It's accurate. But still, you wonder. Will anyone remember that under your calm exterior was a restless curiosity, that you loved bad jokes, preferred tea over sake, and occasionally snuck into the kitchens for grilled fish at midnight? That you once considered commissioning a new palace, but changed your mind because you didn't want to bother the carpenters? Historians still argue whether Go-Saga's reign was one of deliberate restraint or passive acquiescence. They never consider that it might have been a form of endurance art. As the lantern flickers, you notice a painting hanging crooked on the wall. A simple ink sketch of Mount High, clouds curling around its peak. You adjust it, and something behind the frame rustles. A scrap of parchment falls out, yellowed and brittle. It's a poem, unsigned. Even emperors fade like dew upon morning grass, but dew, at least, shines. You tuck it into your sleeve. Whoever wrote it understood you better than most. Outside, a faint breeze rustles the bamboo again. You step into the courtyard and gaze up at the night sky. Kyoto's lights shimmer like fireflies trapped in a bowl. Somewhere beyond the mountains, the samurai continue to build their cities of stone and discipline. You, meanwhile, curate your empire of paper and silence. It's not power in the usual sense, but it's something. A kind of aesthetic defiance. As the crickets drone and the air thickens with humidity, you sit beneath the eaves, tracing patterns in the dust with your fan. You imagine the world 100 years from now. More wars, more emperors, more poets pretending to understand impermanence. And maybe, just maybe, someone will still whisper your name, not as a conqueror, but as the emperor who perfected stillness. You close your eyes. The night folds softly around you, like a silk robe. Somewhere, faintly, a heron cries. You smile. Maybe it's laughing.
Autumn comes quietly, slipping through Kyoto's palace corridors like a thief wearing crimson leaves for a cloak. The cicadas have gone silent. Now it's the crows who hold the morning audience outside your window. You're sitting at your desk, brush poised above paper, when a servant announces the arrival of another messenger from Kamakura. You sigh inwardly. It's always Kamakura, polite, powerful, perpetually reminding you that peace requires their permission. The envoy bows low, his armor lacquered but subdued, his face set in that particular shogunate blend of humility and authority. He speaks of alliances, taxes, and temple restorations, all of which sound like gentle offers but feel like subtle threats. You reply with the usual rhythm, gratitude, harmony, and the illusion of agency. It's become a kind of duet. He leads, you harmonize. When he leaves, you remain seated for a long time listening to the faint echo of his sandals retreating down the wooden hall. Your hand rests on the imperial seal, that small circle of authority that once moved armies but now mostly approves garden renovations. You look out the window at the maple trees blazing red. A gust of wind scatters a handful of leaves across the veranda. They look, briefly, like falling banners from some invisible battlefield. You can almost hear the laughter of ancestors who once commanded legions. You whisper, "Don't mock me," though a part of you knows they would. The truth is, your reign sits at the intersection of two worlds, the old courtly age and the new military order. The Kamakura shogunate, governed by the Hojo clan, manages real power, taxes, armies, law enforcement, while the emperor remains a living emblem. You've become in effect the world's most elaborately dressed witness. Historians still argue whether you ever attempted to reassert control or if you mastered the subtler game of influence through ritual. They point to your patronage of temples, your diplomacy, your quiet but strategic appointments. You prefer to think of it as aikido with words, redirecting momentum without ever striking first. Later that week, a courtier named Fujiwara no Yoretsune visits to discuss a matter of etiquette. "Your Majesty," he says, bowing so low his nose almost meets the floor, "some in Kamakura find your recent use of crimson seals assertive." You blink. "Assertive?" "Yes," he whispers. "They worry it suggests autonomy." You consider this. "So, our seal color now provokes anxiety." He nods gravely. You nod back, equally grave. "Then perhaps next time I'll use gold ink. That should terrify them." He doesn't know whether to laugh. You do it for him, quietly, under your breath. The palace functions as it always does. Endless ceremonies, careful gestures, words chosen like brushstrokes on fragile paper. You've come to understand that this delicate system is its own kind of power. When the shogunate's envoys watch you perform ancient rites with absolute precision, they glimpse something older than their swords, something that cannot be conquered, only endured. In the evenings you host poetry circles, not because you're bored, but because culture is your last line of diplomacy. A well-placed verse can say what politics cannot. The courtiers understand this, even if they pretend otherwise. At one gathering, a young noble recites, "The waves obey the moon, yet never touch it." Everyone murmurs approval. You, meanwhile, sip your tea and think, "Yes, and emperors obey the shogun, yet never thank him." A fringe tidbit, preserved in some eccentric chronicle, claims you once sent a gift of seashells to the regent, symbolizing your mutual reliance. The story leaves out that each shell was hollowed out, polished, and glued shut. Beautiful, but empty. You like to imagine the regent turning one over in his hand, frowning at the subtle insult. Still, there's no real malice between Kyoto and Kamakura, just exhaustion. They need your legitimacy, you need their muscle. It's an awkward marriage, but at least neither side insists on passion. One evening, rain falls heavy over the city, drumming softly against the tiled roofs. You sit by the open veranda, watching lightning illuminate the garden. The air smells of wet earth and pine.
Your chamberlain approaches cautiously. "Your Majesty," he says. "The regent sends word there are disturbances in Kyushu, bandits claiming imperial descent." You smile faintly. Everyone's a relative when there's rebellion involved. He hesitates. "Shall I issue a proclamation?" You shake your head. "No, the regent will handle it. We'll just pray for harmony, and perhaps a touch of common sense." When he leaves, you stay watching the rain. You think about power, how it shifts like water, never disappearing, only changing form. The shogunate's authority may rule the provinces, but the emperor still reigns in the imagination. Kyoto, for all its ceremonies and silences, remains the beating heart of culture. Monks compose philosophical essays in your name. Artists paint mandalas that shimmer like portals to better worlds. The court may be politically irrelevant, but spiritually, it's indispensable. A mainstream historical fact, during your reign, Buddhism, especially the Zen schools, began to flourish among both nobles and warriors. You sponsor temple reconstructions, invite monks to lecture at court, and even dabble in meditation yourself. Sitting cross-legged on tatami mats, you discover that enlightenment feels suspiciously like a nap you're not allowed to call a nap. Sometimes, in those quiet sessions, you catch yourself thinking about the absurdity of it all. The emperor meditating on detachment while being the literal center of ritual obsession. You nearly laugh out loud once, earning a puzzled glance from the monk. The monk asks gently, "What distracts you, Your Majesty?" You answer truthfully, "Reality." Ah, the hardest illusion to escape. Outside, the storm fades. The next morning dawns bright and impossibly clear. Kyoto gleams after rain, the city washed clean. You step outside the palace gates for a rare public appearance. The crowd bows low, their faces upturned with awe. For them, you're still a figure of divine stability. Their belief sustains the empire more than any decree or sword. You raise your hand in a slow, deliberate gesture. The crowd murmurs blessings. Children wave paper fans. You see their eyes, hopeful, uncertain, and feel a pang of affection. You may not command armies, but you can give them this illusion of continuity, and perhaps that's worth something. As you return inside, you think of the envoy's bow, the monk's riddles, the courtier's endless chatter, and realize that ruling without ruling has its own art form. You are the eye of a storm so vast that stillness becomes strategy. That night, in the faint glow of an oil lamp, you write in your diary, "The shogunate commands, the court endures, the people believe." Perhaps this is balance, or perhaps it is simply delay. You close the book and listen to the distant rhythm of temple bells. The air feels lighter, as if the universe briefly approves of your patience. Then faintly, a servant sneezes outside your chamber. You smile. "Bless you." You whisper to the night. Even the smallest sounds here feel sacred.
Winter melts into another spring, and the palace gardens awaken as though the earth itself has just remembered beauty exists. You walk through the eastern courtyard, brushing your fingertips lightly across new plum blossoms. They tremble, scattering pale petals that cling to your sleeve. A good omen, someone will say later, but omens, like compliments, are plentiful and mostly unreliable. The morning begins, as always, with ritual. Offerings at the shrine, petitions from ministers, and a breakfast so formal it could be mistaken for theater. You taste little of it. Your mind drifts instead toward the temples, the monks, and the quiet sanctuaries of the city. Religion has become your favorite escape route, not because you're particularly devout, but because temples offer something the palace never does: silence that doesn't require performance. You start visiting them more often, each one a different kind of mirror. The Zen temples smell of stone and moss, their simplicity intoxicating after so much courtly ornamentation. The Tendai monasteries hum with ritual chants that feel ancient enough to anchor the sky itself. One morning, you take a discreet trip to Enrikaji, perched high on Mount Healy. The path winds upward through mist and pine. The attendants struggle with the climb, panting quietly behind you, their sandals slick with dew. You, meanwhile, are exhilarated. For once, there are no courtiers bowing, no gossip to sidestep, only the steady rhythm of your own breath and the whisper of wind through cedar trees. When you reach the summit, the monks greet you with quiet smiles and cups of tea that taste faintly of smoke and earth. You sit cross-legged in their meditation hall, eyes half closed, and let the incense curl into your lungs. For a brief, impossible moment, the world feels manageable. Then your mind ruins it by remembering the taxes. Historians still argue whether your devotion was spiritual or strategic. Supporting temples meant favor with monks, and monks held moral sway over both court and countryside. You probably didn't overthink it at the time. You just liked the quiet, the scrolls, the smell of rain-soaked tatami. But even in peace, small tremors ripple beneath the surface. Messengers bring word of minor uprisings, peasants protesting levies, minor lords testing boundaries, rumors of strange omens. One report mentions ghostly lights in the western provinces, said to be the spirits of fallen warriors wandering the hills. You pretend to dismiss it, but you can't help picturing them. Lost samurai, armor clanking softly in the fog, still saluting a throne that no longer commands. A mainstream historical fact anchors this mood. During your reign, Japan experienced relative calm, yet beneath that calm lay fractures, the gradual split between aristocratic culture and warrior governance. It's the lull before centuries of turbulence, a pause so long that even the poets mistake it for eternity. Back in Kyoto, you hold a small ceremony at the Shoranen temple. The monks chant, the courtiers fan themselves, and you focus on not sneezing from the incense. When it's done, you linger to speak with an elderly abbot whose eyes are sharp despite his years. The empire, he tells you, is like this incense. It burns slowly, releasing fragrance. But if the smoke stops, no one remembers the wood beneath it. You tilt your head. So we are the fragrance, not the fire. He smiles. You, Majesty, are the silence between them. You think about that for days. A few nights later, the palace hosts a moon viewing party. Everyone gathers on the veranda, sipping sake, trading poems about transience. You notice a small tremor of anxiety in the air, a rumor about distant rebels perhaps, or simply the weight of unspoken truth. Still, the moon hangs perfect and round, so the courtiers pretend serenity. You raise your cup and compose a verse aloud. If peace is illusion, may the moon at least be real. There's polite laughter, though some glance nervously at one another. Humor, it seems, is more dangerous than rebellion when it comes from an emperor. Later that night, you walk alone to the inner gardens. The air hums with crickets, lanterns glow softly along the paths. You pause by the pond where the moon's reflection ripples among the koi. For a fleeting moment, you imagine jumping in just to see what freedom feels like. Then you remember how heavy your robes are and settle for skipping a pebble instead. It sinks immediately. You decide that's symbolic of something. A fringe tidbit preserved in obscure temple lore says that during one of your visits, you personally helped carry lumber for a hall reconstruction. Some say the monks were horrified, others inspired. You remember it simply as a day when no one bowed at you and you could finally use your hands for something practical.
Back in the palace, the days stretch soft and uneventful. You sponsor a few more temples, issue minor decrees about maintaining road shrines, and approve the repair of a pagoda struck by lightning. Nothing dramatic, just the gentle housekeeping of empire. Still, you can't ignore the growing murmur of the outer provinces. Letters from Kamakura arrive more frequently, their tone polite but firm. One reads, "The actuary extends gratitude for your majesty's prayers for stability. In return, the shogunate assures continued governance in your divine name." You read it twice and realize it's the most elegant way possible to say, "We'll handle things, don't interfere." You consider writing back something equally polite. "Gratitude for your gratitude. May your competence never exceed your humility." But you settle for silence. Sometimes absence speaks louder. In the following weeks, Kyoto's rhythms continue. The court reciting verses, the artisans crafting lacquerware, the priests debating theology so subtle it could dissolve if you stared at it too hard. Peace is routine, and routine is its own kind of anesthesia. One morning, though, something small and strange happens. A black cat slips into the council chamber during deliberations. It walks calmly between ministers, leaps onto the dais, and sits beside you as if auditioning for divine companion status. The courtiers freeze. One says, "It's a spirit." Another says, "A curse." You stroke the cat's head. It purrs. "Then may it curse us all with calm." The ministers don't know whether to laugh or record it as an imperial edict. For weeks afterwards, cats mysteriously enjoy better treatment around the palace. By midsummer, Kyoto grows sticky and bright again. You sponsor another poetry contest, though you suspect everyone's running out of metaphors for moonlight. Still, the event draws the usual crowd of nobles in immaculate robes, fans fluttering like gossip in motion. During intermission, one young poet reads you a daring piece comparing the emperor to a caged crane, beautiful, admired, but flightless. The room freezes. You feel every eye on you. Then you smile faintly and say, "A fine observation, though I'd prefer a larger cage." Laughter breaks the tension, and the poet exhales in relief. That night, you sit on the veranda, the cat now curled in your lap. You look out at the glowing city and think of all the quiet revolutions that go unnoticed. Temples rebuilt, farmers surviving another season, poets learning not to fear their own words. Perhaps your reign isn't about changing history, but preserving the pause between its storms. Kyoto hums gently in the darkness. A temple bell rings somewhere far off, a deep note that vibrates through your ribs. You close your eyes and breathe in the faint scent of incense, blossoms, and distant rain. Stillness, you murmur, is also a kind of empire. The cat yawns. You take that as agreement.
You wake before dawn, startled by the sound of soft footsteps echoing down the hall. At first, you think it's another servant changing incense sticks or a monk walking meditation rounds. But the rhythm is wrong, hurried, nervous. You rise, sliding open the shoji door just enough to glimpse the shadowed figure of an attendant bowing low. "Your Majesty," he whispers, "Prince Muntaka has arrived from Kamakura." That name lands with the subtlety of a thrown rock. Muntaka, your son, your hope, your eventual headache. The boy had been sent east years ago to serve as shogun, a symbolic gesture meant to keep peace between throne and bakufu. The idea was that he'd represent imperial authority in the warrior capital. The reality, of course, was that he was surrounded by men who could replace him with a polite cough. You dress quickly. the layers of silk feeling heavier than usual. When you enter the audience hall, the torches flicker low, and there he stands, taller than you remember, face sharper, eyes carrying the faint glaze of someone used to pretending not to see daggers in smiles. He bows deeply, almost too formally. "Father," he says. You nod. "You've grown into your armor well." "And into my patience," he replies. And that's when you know he's inherited both your irony and your restraint. The reunion is brief and ceremonial. Courtiers hover, pretending not to listen, while motherly relatives hover louder, pretending it's about family and not politics. The air between you and your son hums with unspoken things: respect, resentment, and that uniquely imperial flavor of affection that smells faintly of paperwork. Historians still argue whether this visit was genuine reconciliation or a performance staged to reassure the Kamakura government. You recall it as a blur of polite meals and cautious smiles, each course a conversation that never quite touched truth. Still, the palace comes alive with gossip. Ministers whisper that the emperor's sons are plotting for influence. Poets compose verses comparing family unity to cherry blossoms, beautiful but doomed to fall. A week later, Muntaka leaves again, bowing low before departing eastward. You watch him go, his figure shrinking down the long avenue until he disappears in the morning mist. You can't shake the feeling that he's walking toward a stage you built but can no longer direct. You turn back toward the palace, and in the still air you think you hear the faint clatter of distant hooves, the sound of history rehearsing its next act. The next months bring more visitors, more family, more drama. Your sons, so many princes with so many mothers, start to form their own little courts within the court. Each has retainers, poets, and personal tea preferences. At first, it's harmless, youthful competition wrapped in brocade. But soon, the factions begin to whisper louder than the wind through the bamboo. One day, as you sit copying sutras in your private quarters, a habit you've taken up for calm, and maybe to avoid meetings, a minister interrupts. "Your Majesty," he says delicately, "there are reports that Prince Tsunehito's attendants have refused to bow to Prince Hisahiro's men." You look up from the scroll. "So the apocalypse has begun?" He swallows. "Not yet, but the poetry contests have become hostile." You sigh. "Ah, civil war in verse. Truly, our family leads by example." It's a joke, of course, but it hides a slow dread. You've seen enough dynasties splinter over less. Inheritance disputes, maternal ambitions, even omens involving oddly shaped clouds. You start keeping your distance, like a man watching his house develop hairline cracks, but deciding it's too lovely to rebuild. The court continues its elegant routine, pretending harmony. The garden parties resume. The calligraphers still debate brushstroke philosophy. And yet, beneath every bow, there's the question: which prince will inherit? A mainstream historical fact. After your abdication, your descendants divided into two rival lines, the Jimmy-Owen and the Daikakuji branches, whose alternating claims to the throne would fuel generations of political maneuvering. The seeds of that split are sprouting already, right here in your peaceful court. One evening, you host a tea gathering meant to calm the tensions. You've recently become enamored with the simple Zen practice of whisked tea. The way the powder clouds, the way the foam settles into calm. You serve the princes yourself, hoping the ritual will dissolve rivalry. For a few minutes, it almost works. The room hums with that fragile harmony born of shared quiet. Then, Prince Hisato remarks, "The foam on my cup is thinner than my brother's." You raise your eyebrow. Then perhaps enlightenment favors humility. They laugh, too quickly. The laughter feels rehearsed, brittle. You sip your tea, wondering if tranquility can truly survive human nature. A fringe tidbit claims that you sometimes disguised yourself to walk among Kyoto's common folk, slipping out with a single guard under moonlight. Supposedly, you once visited a riverside tea house where no one recognized you. You listened to gossip about your own family while sipping cheap sake and thinking, "So, this is what honesty tastes like." Back at the palace, you notice the seasons shifting again. The maple leaves burn red, then fade to brown. Time folds gently, but insistently. You write small poems, not less for beauty now, but more as therapy. Two cranes at one pond. Wings overlap, not knowing the wind will choose one. You keep that verse private. The tensions between your sons grow into something almost theatrical. Courtiers take sides subtly, through choice of robes or which garden they walk in. The women of the palace, those magnificent strategists of silk and smiles, become diplomats, spies, and therapists all at once. You've learned not to interfere too much. Your power, as such as it is, depends on stillness. But even stillness can't stop the undercurrent. Sometimes, when you wake in the middle of the night, you hear muffled arguments down distant corridors, voices too young and too proud. You imagine the future historians shaking their heads, muttering, "It all began there," with whispers under painted ceilings. There's one night that won't leave you. The moon is thin, the sky pale, and your youngest son, a child barely into his teens, visits your chambers. "Father," he says timidly, "why do my brothers glare at each other so much?" You want to tell him it's because they care too much about what you think. But you say instead, because love sometimes disguises itself as competition. The trick is to see through the costume. He nods solemnly, then asks, "And if they can't?" You say, "Then the costume wins." You ruffle his hair. He looks at you as though you've just revealed the secret of the universe, and you envy his innocence. The next morning, messengers from Kamakura arrive. The shogunate, ever polite, requests clarification about succession rumors. The implication is clear. Your family drama has become a national concern. You write a reply dripping in civility, assuring them of unity and divine harmony, knowing well neither exists. That night, you pace the veranda as rain patters softly against the roof tiles. You think of your ancestors, emperors who ruled through war and fire, and wonder whether peace is a greater test. There's a certain cruelty in serenity. It forces you to confront not chaos, but yourself. In the lantern glow, you catch your reflection on wet stone. The face looking back isn't just tired, it's layered with centuries of expectation.
You start writing again. Not decrees, not poetry meant for courtly applause, but something quieter, almost secret. Your attendants call them reflections, though you think of them more as half-whispered conversations with the empty space around you. The ink flows slowly, hesitant at first, as if the brush itself needs convincing that honesty won't be punished. In the beginning, you write about ordinary things. The way the morning light strikes the lacquered pillars, the texture of your tea bowl, the sound of cicadas that remind you that even noise can feel holy if it's steady enough. Then, gradually, the words start to lean inward. You find yourself describing feelings, doubts, and the slow unraveling of ambition. The palace still moves around you, a careful theater of ritual, but you've become something of a ghost in your own play. You let the younger generation take on more ceremony while you slip away to write. Historians still argue whether these journals, what later generations call the hidden emperor's diaries, ever truly existed. A few fragments survive in temple archives, short, cryptic entries with no dates, no names, just impressions. One line supposedly reads, "Power wears its own silence until the silence begins to sound like prayer." Scholars debate whether that's yours or a later forgery. You smile, centuries too late, at the idea that someone would forge your quiet. The daily rhythms blur. You rise with the soft light, sip thin tea, and write while the world is still half asleep. In those hours, you're not emperor, or father, or symbol. You're just a person holding ink to paper, trying to make sense of the stillness that history insists on calling peace. Sometimes you write about dreams, recurring ones where you walk through Kyoto at night, streets empty, torches guttering low, and you find yourself approaching the imperial palace only to realize the gates are sealed from within. You wake up unsure whether you were locked out or keeping yourself in. The monks who visit you notice a change. One, a quiet scholar from Todaiji, observes that you've begun to speak more softly than ever, as if even your breath might disturb the equilibrium. He tells you of an old Chinese saying, "When a ruler turns his gaze inward, the empire sleeps easier." You're not sure whether it's a compliment or a polite diagnosis of detachment. To distract yourself, you take up the habit of copying sutras by moonlight. It's soothing. The rhythm of the brush, the faint scratch on the paper. You imagine the ink soaking into the page like thoughts seeping into time. You've heard that monks sometimes hide tiny personal confessions between the characters of sacred texts. You consider doing the same, then laugh quietly at yourself. What could you possibly confess that hasn't already been whispered by gossip? A fringe tidbit, one that makes historians squint skeptically, claims that you also composed short verses and hid them between the pages of official court documents. One was supposedly found centuries later, scribbled in the margin of a land decree. The world's measure is written in paper and size. You have to admit, it sounds like something you'd write on a particularly reflective afternoon. As your writing deepens, so does your awareness of how much you faded from direct relevance. Messages from Kamakura arrive less often now. When they do, the tone is curt, efficient, and unmistakably self-assured. The shogunate doesn't need to hide its control anymore. It simply assumes it. You feel oddly relieved. There's a freedom in irrelevance, a strange lightness in realizing that the empire keeps spinning even when you stop pushing it. Sometimes you sit by the veranda, reading your older entries. You find that your handwriting has softened over the years, the strokes less rigid, more human. You pause on one line, "Stillness is not surrender if you choose it." You can't recall when you wrote it, but it feels like advice from a past version of yourself. The palace cats, descendants of that first black one, seem to like your company. They slip through half-open doors and curl up on discarded scrolls. You talk to them sometimes. They never judge your pacing or your pauses. When the younger courtiers visit, they bow and flatter, but you can tell they're performing for the idea of you rather than the person. You almost prefer the cats. One afternoon, while dictating a routine blessing, your brush slips, smudging the page.
A young scribe gasps as if you've committed treason against paper itself. You laugh softly. Perfection is exhausting, you tell him. He looks startled, perhaps expecting imperial wisdom, not mild nihilism. Still, you keep writing. Fragments of thought, prayers, jokes, the occasional rant about how no one ever brings the right kind of tea anymore. You don't expect anyone to read it. You write because it feels like breathing through ink. Historians still argue whether the diary's later disappearance was deliberate. Some suggest you ordered them buried with you, fearing misinterpretation. Others believe monks spirited them away, considering them sacred reflections. You imagine both are true, in their own way. Truth, like incense smoke, tends to split and twist before it fades. You begin to notice your memory playing tricks. Names blur, dates dissolve, but sensations remain. The feel of wind through the bamboo shutters, the faint ache in your fingers after writing too long, the distant laughter of children in the gardens. You cling to those sounds. Occasionally, when the mood strikes, you still hold small gatherings, tea, poetry, quiet conversation. You invite only a handful of people, the kind who speak softly and listen without rushing to fill silence. Once, a monk reads you a passage from an old text that says, "To rule is to write the invisible line between order and mercy." You nod slowly. "And when one stops ruling," you ask. "Then one begins erasing," he replies. You smile. "Then I must already be an artist." As night falls, the palace glows with lamplight, but your room stays dim. You prefer the half-shadow. It's easier to imagine you're part of the ink and not the page. You dip your brush once more, writing without aim or structure. Today, the rain sounds like thought. You pause. The ink runs slightly, blurring the word thought. You decide to leave it that way. Imperfection feels truer now than precision ever did. You close the diary for the evening, set the brush aside, and listen. Somewhere beyond the palace, a bell tolls from a distant temple. It's the same sound you've heard your entire life, yet tonight it feels closer, almost personal, as though it's striking from within your chest. You whisper to the darkness, "If I am forgotten, let it be kindly." The candle flickers low, and for a brief, quiet instant, it feels as though the entire empire holds its breath with you.
The sound of the city begins to change. You notice it one morning, standing by the veranda as a low haze curls through Kyoto's streets. It's quieter, fewer footsteps, fewer merchants shouting about their wares, fewer children chasing wooden hoops down the lane. The city hasn't died. It's simply reorganized itself around indifference. Kyoto is still beautiful, but now it feels like a painting admired more than inhabited. The court remains loyal in ceremony, but not in spirit. Ministers bow deeply, speak softly, and disappear promptly to handle matters that no longer need your approval. The shogunate in Kamakura hums along with bureaucratic precision, dispatching officials who smile with professional grace while quietly auditing everything under heaven. You can sense it, the empire's center of gravity shifting away from the throne, like a slow-moving tide that doesn't splash, only recedes. And still, you remain where you are, the figure in the folding screen, the candle in daylight. You stroll through the gardens, the gravel crunching under your sandals. The air smells of damp moss and fading chrysanthemums. You pause by the pond and watch koi drift through the mirrored sky. You've mastered the art of patience, you murmur to them, though you suspect they only care about the next handful of crumbs. Historians still argue whether your detachment was resignation or foresight, whether you saw the world sliding away and decided to let it, or whether you were simply too refined to grasp at power that refused to be held. Perhaps it's both. You suspect even emperors have to pick their serenity battles. Occasionally, messages still arrive from Kamakura, neatly folded, sealed in wax, smelling faintly of ink and sea salt. The letters begin with florid reverence and end with logistical decrees, land surveys, tax adjustments, appointments of provincial governors. You read them all and nod, the way one does when being read a bedtime story you already know by heart. Then, a small letter arrives one afternoon that makes you pause. It's not from the regent, but from a clerk, a minor functionary who must have risked career or life to send it. The handwriting trembles slightly. "Your Majesty," it reads, "I have copied this letter in secret to inform you that your edicts, though still received, are now reviewed only for phrasing, not for policy. The shogunate believes it prudent to preserve the illusion of unity. Please forgive my boldness, but I thought you should know what they no longer bother to hide." You read it twice, fold it neatly, and tuck it beneath a small jade paperweight shaped like a tortoise. You think of replying, then realize there's nothing to say. Truth has its own completion. That evening, as the court musicians perform, you find yourself gazing past the lanterns towards the horizon. Kamakura lies somewhere beyond the darkness, an invisible capital pulsing with energy, ambition, and the scent of brine. You can almost hear the echo of waves colliding against the shore, rhythmic as bureaucratic efficiency. The next morning, you call for your scribe and dictate a short decree. Let all officials act with sincerity, and let all sincerity remain unmeasured. The scribe hesitates, unsure what it means, but writes it anyway. You almost add, "and let the emperor sleep peacefully," but decide it's implied. The palace begins to feel more like a museum than a seat of power. Each corridor gleams with polished memory. Courtiers whisper through silk screens about things that no longer exist, the latest calligraphy styles, the subtleties of fan design, the metaphysics of tea whisking. You find comfort in their oblivion. They're preserving culture the way old women preserve pickles, carefully, beautifully, without realizing it's for an age that's already past. A mainstream historical fact. By your later years, the Kamakura shogunate had perfected its administrative machinery, establishing networks of stewards and constables across Japan. Kyoto, once the empire's brain, had become its ceremonial heart, still beating, but faintly. One afternoon, a monk visits from Kamakura itself, a wiry man with the calm eyes of someone who's seen both temples and battlefields. He bows deeply and offers a scroll. "A gift, Majesty," he says, "from those who still revere the throne." You unroll it. Inside is a hand-painted image of Mount Fuji, its slopes streaked with white, its peak lost in cloud. "It is beautiful," you say. "It was painted by a samurai's wife," he replies. "She said the mountain reminded her of endurance." You smile faintly. Then she understands the throne better than most courtiers. He laughs softly, the way only monks and old cats can. Before leaving, he adds, "The warriors respect what you represent, even if they no longer need what you command." You keep the painting. It hangs in your study, a horizon that never moves. Sometimes you walk through Kyoto disguised again, just to feel what remains real. The streets are cleaner now, more organized, the result of shogunate governance. There are new checkpoints, new signs of order, fewer fires. But the air feels thinner, like a song missing its melody. You stop by a merchant's stall, admire some ceramics, and overhear two men discussing politics.
"Have you heard?" one says. "The Bakufu plans to build a new warehouse system. Efficient, they say. Keeps rice flowing." The other nods. "Better them than the court. At least the warriors get things done." You smile behind your sleeve. It's oddly satisfying hearing the truth spoken without ceremony. You buy a cup, pay too much for it on purpose, and wander off humming a tune from childhood. Later, back in the palace, the same cup sits on your writing desk. You use it for ink water. Perfect symmetry between utility and memory. A fringe tidbit from temple lore claims that around this time you began holding nighttime poetry circles where attendants had to write in total darkness, letting the brush listen instead of see. The practice supposedly produced surreal verses about shadows, ghosts, and laughter without mouths. Some claim the exercise inspired a later genre of dream poetry. You remember it mostly as an excuse to laugh in the dark without anyone asking you if you'd lost your mind. You start sleeping less. The nights feel longer, filled with wind against the shutters and the distant hoot of owls. Sometimes you imagine Kamakura as a great machine humming through the darkness, its gears turning whether or not anyone prays. You wonder if in some cosmic sense that's progress, or just louder futility. The next morning, the chief steward approaches nervously. "Your Majesty," he begins, "the Treasury wishes to know if the annual inspection is still necessary, given recent arrangements." You tilt your head. If the act of counting is no longer useful, perhaps the act of pretending still is. He blinks. "I'll tell them it continues then." "Good," you say. "Pretend efficiently." Historians will later call this period the invisible reign, a time when your influence survived only through etiquette, through the performance of empire. And you, sitting beneath painted ceilings, find the whole thing rather poetic, power that functions by existing rather than doing. It's almost Zen in its irony. In the evenings, you sometimes reread your old diary fragments, the ones written when you still believed silence could guide a kingdom. They seem both naive and true. You add a final line beneath one entry. "Even mountains erode politely." Outside, autumn returns. The leaves fall in slow spirals, like handwriting on the air. Kyoto still glows in the sunset, delicate and ceremonial, while somewhere far away, Kamakura ticks on like a clock. You close your eyes and imagine both cities breathing, one in meditation, the other in motion. You realize, with a strange calm, that the empire has become exactly what it was always meant to be. A rhythm too vast for any single heart to control. You are no longer its pulse, just its echo. And that, you decide, is enough.
You wake to the sound of bells. Not temple bells, these are closer, smaller, the bronze chime used to summon attendants. But no one comes. The air feels thicker these days, time slower. You're aware of your breath, of how it catches before fully escaping. Even the morning light has grown more patient, sliding across the tatami like a guest reluctant to wake you. You rise, steady yourself, and step out into the corridor. The palace feels emptier now. The laughter of young courtiers has faded. The echo of sandals on wood has softened into something almost reverential. Kyoto still hums beyond the walls, but here, in the imperial residence, everything has been reduced to ceremony, your heartbeat included. There's a letter waiting on the low table, written in the formal Kamakura hand. You already know the tone before breaking the seal, respect polished to sterility.
The regent offers prayers for your majesty's continued health and requests confirmation of the annual rites for the harvest season. The Bakufu remains ever devoted to the imperial household. You smile faintly. The letter is so careful it might as well be written on eggshells. You set it aside. These days, you've perfected the art of appearing serene. It's a useful disguise for someone who no longer directs events, but still occupies their symbolic center. You attend ceremonies, make blessings, listen to petitions that have already been decided elsewhere. You've discovered that stillness can be a form of command. If you hold it long enough, others mistake it for wisdom. Historians still argue whether your later conduct was an act of quiet defiance or the graceful surrender of a realist. The truth is simpler. You just got tired of pretending noise was influence. On certain afternoons, when the wind carries the scent of river water, you walk to the edge of the gardens and look west, toward where Mount Atogo looms faintly in the haze. The monks say it's sacred, the mountain of protection. You like to imagine it watching over Kyoto like a patient guardian, too polite to interfere. The palace itself has changed subtly. Walls repainted, rooms reassigned, courtiers rotated in and out like shifting constellations. You, however, remain, the fixed star they orbit around, even if your gravity's grown gentle. A mainstream historical fact, during the closing years of your reign, you abdicated formally, but retained influence as a retired emperor, in se, rule. A custom that let former sovereigns steer politics from behind the scenes. In practice, your influence had become more spiritual than administrative. You were the figure to whom oaths were sworn, even if no one asked your opinion before breaking them. You find the irony almost funny. Power, it turns out, has a half-life. Still, there's beauty in ritual. You throw yourself into perfecting it, the turn of a wrist during a blessing, the rhythm of recitation, the exact moment when the incense should be lit so the smoke curves upward like a question mark. The more meaningless politics becomes, the more meaning you pour into ceremony. It's your final rebellion, to turn performance into peace. One evening, during the Lantern Festival, you host a modest gathering on the palace terrace. Courtiers line the veranda, their sleeves glowing in candlelight as they set paper lanterns afloat down the Kamo River. The air smells faintly of cedar oil and warm wax. You hold one lantern a moment longer than the rest, tracing your name on it with a fingertip before letting it go. May peace float farther than memory, you whisper. A few attendants overhear. One later claims it was the most poetic thing ever uttered by a living emperor. Another insists it sounded suspiciously like farewell. Historians still argue whether you meant it as prayer or prophecy. After the festival, you sit alone in your chamber. The moonlight hits your writing desk just right, catching on the surface of your inkstone. You decide to write one more reflection. If my reign is uneventful, may uneventfulness be remembered as mercy. You pause, then add, if history forgets me, may forgetting be gentle. The ink dries, the candle hisses. You don't sign it, you never do. In the following months, the capital grows more efficient, less lyrical. Kamakura's orders arrive swiftly, often already implemented by the time they reach you. Couriers bow, deliver scrolls, and retreat before you've even spoken. You suspect some of them think you're ornamental, like a sacred tree no one dares to cut down, but no one really waters either.
A fringe tidbit from a later diary claims that in your final years you took to speaking directly to the palace walls. Not madness, just conversation. You'd murmur updates about the weather, thank the beams for holding, and apologize for the drafts. They've heard more truth than most ministers, you told one servant. The servant pretended not to laugh. Your health wavers, though you pretend otherwise. The court physicians insist on endless decoctions and prayers, none of which seem designed for comfort. You humor them. Mortality, you decide, is like paperwork, inevitable, tedious, but better handled politely. One afternoon, your youngest son visits. He's older now, his face carrying both affection and exhaustion. "Father," he says softly, "the regent wishes to confirm your approval of next year's court appointments." You raise an eyebrow. "He wishes to confirm that I approve of what he's already decided?" He hesitates. "Essentially, yes." You laugh, a dry, unroyal sound that startles even you. "Then I approve thoroughly. Efficiency is next to divinity." He smiles, but his eyes betray worry. Before he leaves, you touch his hand lightly. "Don't let the quiet fool you," you say. "It takes more courage to remain calm than to shout." That night, you dream of Kyoto before all this. Vibrant, noisy, fragrant with market spice and summer rain. You see yourself walking barefoot across a wooden bridge, anonymous, unburdened. You stop halfway and watch carp leap in the current, silver arcs catching light. In the dream, you understand something simple. The world doesn't owe you memory, only moments. You wake with tears on your cheeks and no sadness attached to them, just the soft ache of release. Days blur again. The court prepares for New Year festivities, banners and silks unfurling with ritual enthusiasm. You sit by the veranda, wrapped in an extra robe, watching snow fall across the palace roofs. The flakes vanish on contact, like promises too shy to linger. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls, not for you, not yet, but near enough to remind you how thin the walls between moments have become. You whisper, "Even the snow knows when to disappear." Later that evening, the steward reports that your lantern from the festival was found downstream, miraculously intact. The courtiers interpret it as an omen of long life. You know better. It simply drifted slower than expected. And yet, you take comfort in that. After all, there's grace in lasting a little longer than history intended.
You rise later than usual. The morning is unusually quiet. No servants whispering outside the door, no creak of sliding panels. The sunlight, filtered through the paper screens, seems thinner, almost translucent. You realize you've entered the final hush of your life, though no one has announced it formally. Death in a palace rarely needs an introduction. It simply enters like an old friend who knows the way. You breathe, carefully. The air feels like silk drawn through your chest. Someone has placed a brazier nearby, faint smoke curling upward with the smell of pine and sandalwood. You appreciate the courtesy. Even endings deserve good fragrance. You sit upright, your favorite robe draped across your knees. The fabric is soft from years of careful washing, blue-gray, embroidered with faint gold cranes. You once joked to your attendants that the cranes looked bored, mid-flight but going nowhere. Now they feel oddly fitting companions. You pick up your brush one last time. The ink feels cool, alive, aware of its purpose. On a clean page, you write slowly. Even the uneventful are part of the story,
You pause, then add a final line. Stillness was never nothing. Historians still argue whether this final note was genuine or apocryphal, whether a dying emperor truly had the strength to write so neatly. The handwriting, they say, matches your middle years rather than your final one, but for once, you prefer the legend. It's neater than truth. Outside, you hear the distant rustle of bamboo. You think of how the stalks bend but never break, how their music sounds like breathing when the wind is kind. You remember your sons, some crowned, some exiled, all bearing the weight of your calm legacy. You wonder if any of them ever understood that your restraint was its own kind of rebellion. A young monk enters quietly, carrying a small tray of tea. He bows deeply, avoiding your eyes. "Your Majesty," he whispers, "shall I read from the Lotus Sutra?" You smile faintly. "No," you murmur, "let the silence chant tonight." He hesitates, then places the tray beside you and leaves. You listen to his footsteps receding, each one softer than the last, until they merge with the air. For a moment, the palace feels alive again, not bustling, but breathing, the way a mountain breathes beneath snow. You feel its age in the wood, the accumulated size of centuries pressed into every beam, the quiet hum of continuity. You think of the lantern that drifted farther downstream, of how no one ever saw where it stopped. Perhaps it didn't. Perhaps it simply joined the current, light becoming motion. You like that idea. It's the closest thing to immortality you can accept, to become part of movement itself. A fringe tidbit says that when the monks later prepared your chamber, they found the inkstone still damp and the brush perfectly balanced across it, as if you'd stepped away mid-sentence. Some took it as divine poise, others as eerie coincidence. You, of course, had planned it that way, a little aesthetic control over chaos. Your breath comes slower now, but it's steady, rhythmic, almost meditative. You let your eyes close, not in weariness but curiosity. What does one see when seeing stops? In that twilight of thought, your mind drifts through the years like a boot down a gentle river. You pass by small memories, your first coronation robes too large for your shoulders, the awkward bow of a shogun pretending deference, the quiet laughter of courtiers you'd long forgotten. None of it stings anymore. It just floats. Then the river widens and you see Kyoto below you, not as it is, but as it was and might be again. Lanterns shimmer, bells toll, and people move like the steady pulse of history. You realize you were never its center, only one beat in the rhythm. A last breath, a last thought. May calm be contagious. The ink dries. The cranes on your robe stay mid-flight, wings outstretched, going nowhere and everywhere. When dawn comes, the attendants find you seated, eyes half-lidded, brush fallen gently against your sleeve. Outside, the sky burns with pale light, soft and forgiving. They whisper prayers, bow deeply, and open the shutters. The wind slips through, touching the pages of your final writings. The words flutter as if exhaling. And with that, your long and uneventful reign ends, quietly, fittingly, like the last note of a song that no one realized had already ended.
The night softens now, wrapping itself around you like warm silk. The echo of palace bells fades into a slower rhythm, the kind that settles deep behind the ribs and hums there, gentle and low. You followed this journey all the way through, the coronation, the stillness, the silences that spoke louder than armies, and now it's time to drift back to your own world. Take a slow breath.
Feel how the air moves differently now. Lighter, maybe, the way the garden smelled after a rain long ago. The emperor's reign has ended, but his quiet lingers, like incense in the corners of memory. Nothing grand, nothing tragic, just peace. Some say uneventful lives vanish without echo, but you've seen the opposite. Every calm decision, every small kindness, every unspoken word becomes the fabric that holds centuries together. Maybe that's what Emperor Go-Saga understood at the end, that stillness, when chosen, is the bravest act of all. You picture him now, robe folded, inkstone cool, paper fluttering gently as dawn breaks over Kyoto. No throne, no ceremony, just one man exhaling into eternity. And you, listener, can let your own breath follow his, slow, steady, unhurried. Let the last traces of the story dissolve into the hum of your room, into the soft spinning of the night. It's okay to rest now. The empire keeps turning, the lanterns keep floating, and the quiet, always the quiet, remains. Sleep well.